Welcome to Soul Care, a message for your week and for this time of pandemic. Many of us have been experiencing some anxiety and also some depression. Over this past year, we're almost at the 1 year anniversary of our immediate experience of being sheltered in place. My COVID app that I have, that I log into every day, asked me this week if I'd experienced anxiety and if I'd experienced depression and how many times in the past 2 weeks. Well, a year ago, I certainly had a lot of anxiety. I remember worrying about what I touched wherever I went and the panic and fear of going to the grocery store. I certainly felt anxiety a year ago, but I can't say that I do now. I'm not experiencing anxiety now. I'm used to it. But depression, yes. I had to say that I have experienced some depression in the past 2 weeks. How many times? I said a few times. It wasn't clinical depression. It wasn't awful, but it was a feeling of being down, a feeling of just being kind of bored with life, not engaged, feeling kind of grumpy and sad. That was the feeling of depression. It helps if we look at the promise of herd immunity coming, and it certainly helps if we get the shot and then a second vaccine shot in the arm. If you're old enough to have had that by now, or if you are an essential worker, you can be grateful. There is a sense of relief that you have a little more protection, a little less risk. And it simply is an assurance that things are changing. It's getting better. We can't say that there is no risk, however. Scientists tell us that there will always be coronaviruses around. Like any year with the flu, some people will become infected every year. But our chances of getting COVID-19 when there are very few active cases and when more and more people have been immunized will be much less. It's a question of chances and risk. This time of pandemic has taught us how precious life is and that it cannot be taken for granted. Going out and being around people has always had its risks. Getting in the car, getting on an airplane, those are tremendous risks that we are willing to take. Some feel getting the vaccine has too big a risk. But doctors tell us the benefits of the vaccine, without a doubt, outweigh its risk. When I was a teacher, we experienced the Columbine shooting, and the feeling of the fear of that sort of event spread out all over the nation. And then we had to have locks put on our classrooms, on our doors. And a student couldn't just come in and out of class. You had to go and open the door and let the student out and then let someone in, passes from the office or whatever were coming by. It was really an inconvenience to have to go to the door and unlock it every time someone needed to come in or out. So the doors didn't stay locked very long. Then there was a new policy, and there was a code word that would be spoken over the intercom, which would mean that we were to lock down our doors. And at first we kind of listened as if it was going to happen any minute, but of course it wasn't. The risk wasn't that great that we would have a shooter on campus, yet we had to be prepared. The procedure reminded us of potential danger, potential risk of just living and going to school. And we live with that risk all the time. I'm not generally a worrier, but when I was a teacher then, I became aware of how great my responsibility was, that in the event of a dangerous situation, I would be responsible for my students, and I would need to know what to do in emergency cases. So having drills helped prepare us. I have to say that they also elevated our anxiety because they reminded us of the precariousness of life. We grieve over this past year. 500,000 people have been killed by COVID this year. In the United States alone, 500,000. And many people's lives have been changed forever. We're humbled by this disease. It is terribly humbling. And it has done so much to the world that we could never have imagined. We are aware of an impact so beyond us. It makes us feel powerless. In the Common English Bible, 2 of the Beatitudes in the Gospel of Matthew read like this: "Happy are people who grieve, because they will be glad. And happy are people who are humble, because they will inherit the earth." Of course, there are more Beatitudes than this, but let's just take those 2. I can't say that we are exactly happy when we grieve over the losses this past year, for example, and when we are humbled by the tremendous threat of this virus. But we have learned to go on. We even have learned that we can grow a bit in the process, that there is something, in fact, to learn from this experience. I asked a group of people this last week what they had learned or what was their greatest gift that they had received because of a year of experiencing COVID-19. Well, not everybody could say something positive. But one person said tenderly, "My daughter has started calling me every week, and now I so look forward to her call." Happy are people who grieve, because they will be made glad. Happy are people who are humble, because they will inherit the earth. We learn to appreciate small things. Really, they're not so small, I guess. They're big things. Things like love, nature, beauty, harmony, peace. Jewish people have a custom when someone dies. It's called sitting Shiva. The one in mourning sits for 7 days. And people come with food, and they do the chores around the house. They come and go, and the mourner just sits. That allows the person to grieve time and space for a whole week with no other responsibilities. And then on each annual anniversary of the death, there is a special prayer said in synagogue. It helps people remember the death, and much of the mourning has already happened, yet we still need to remember. In one of Alice Walker's books called The Temple of My Familiar, Shug, a woman who befriends Celie in The Color Purple, if you know that film or that book, Shug appears again in this later book, The Temple of My Familiar. Alice Walker gives a chapter to Shug in this book. It's called The Gospel According to Shug. The whole chapter is the retelling of the Beatitudes. The 2 Beatitudes that I read to you today are not listed quite in the same way, but there are 2 that I'm picking of Shug's sayings that remind me of those 2. Here they are as said by Shug. Helped are those who are content to be themselves. They will never lack mystery in their lives, and the joys of self-discovery will be constant. And helped are those who love the earth, their mother, and who willingly suffer that she may not die. In their grief over her pain, they will weep rivers of blood, and in their joy in her lively response to love, they will converse with trees. That's a little different than the way it reads in the Bible. She says, helped are those, not blessed are they who, and not even happy are those who, as in the Common English Bible, but helped are those. I think Walker wants us to be helped by one another. Her writing is always about people in community. Shug helps Celie gain self-confidence and grow into the person she is meant to be. Walker's writing connects humans to each other and to nature, all of creation. We're not alone when we help each other. Life is full of all kinds of risks and suffering, hardships, tragedies, but we have one another. The final beatitude in Matthew is, happy are people who make peace, because they will be called God's children. And in Shug's version, helped are those whose every act is a prayer for peace. On them depends the future of the world. I think the future of the world depends on humans helping one another through the dangers and hardship and risk of everyday living. Life is never without risk, but it is helped along by our helping companions on the journey. May you be a helper to others on their journeys, and may you be helped by them, by the people you love, and may it be well with your soul.